There are so many things that we have to catch up on in the Bricks and Minifigs story because while I was away on vacation, get this, a bunch of things happened. First of which is Bricks and Minifigs stole more than we initially thought. Then we're gonna dive in and take a look at this one that says Bricks and Minifigs just agreed to pay Reckless Ben. Both of these videos are the feature, the topic of today. So let's dive into it and catch up on everything related to this Bricks and Minifigs Reckless Ben story. And thank you guys for subscribing.
This genuinely might be the biggest twist in the entire Bricks and Minifigs series in quite a while, and probably a couple weeks now, because the new information we have now could possibly change everything. So since the CoffeeZilla video, and honestly since the beginning of this whole series, we have seen from the start Bricks and Minifigs trying to correct the $200,000 value of Brian Mansell's collection to the closer to $90,000 to $100,000 range. And even in CoffeeZilla's investigation, his video he made a couple weeks ago, he found the value was likely around a mid-range of $107,000. He confirmed this with Crystal. And since CoffeeZilla's investigation, that has been the number that everyone, including myself, has ran with. $107,000 and $200,000 was just the promotional number used at the beginning. It never represented the actual value of the collection.
Now remember, this is something that's valued based off of collector interest as well. Certain items that may hold more value because of rarity or because people may have more interest in picking it up. So the value of this collection overall could definitely fluctuate.
But today, we have information that might actually be false. $107,000 might be a huge undercut on what this collection is actually worth. So this information comes from the LUS and Sheldon Norcross interview. Now, if you don't remember who Sheldon Norcross is, he was a guy in one of Reckless Ben's videos where he had that police encounter where they took his phone and he locked his phone before he gave it to them, and the police were really mad about that and they kind of mistreated him there. So that's the guy who did this interview. He did this interview with LUS on YouTube a couple days ago, but it didn't get a ton of exposure, and for how insane this is, it definitely should be getting more, and that's part of the reason I'm making this video. But
awesome.
Sheldon Norcross gives us some very interesting insights into the actual collection's value and where CoffeeZilla might have actually been wrong in his $107,000 estimate.
Which is not something that we typically see, right? CoffeeZilla goes pretty deep in his research and is probably one of the best investigative crime people that we have here on YouTube. So I'm actually surprised to hear that.
And his investigation as a whole. Now, first, I do want to say this is not to hate on CoffeeZilla by any means. He does great work, and I still think his video was honest and genuine, and he was trying to get to the bottom of this as much as possible, and this wasn't his intention or anything. There's no way he intentionally left this out, and he did the best that he could, and this isn't to spread hate to CoffeeZilla by any means. But it appears his investigation may have been missing some very vital facts that have just been kind of hard to find and hard to realize with all these gag orders, the temporary restraining order, and everything like that, silencing all these people involved with the situation that would want to get this information out, but otherwise couldn't because of all of the gag orders.
Now, we also have to keep in mind that the CoffeeZilla video came out approximately 2 weeks ago, where since then, lots more information has come to the surface, so you never know when you're going to see an updated one from CoffeeZilla either.
But Sheldon gives us some really good info on the collection's actual value. The biggest development here is he tells us there is $50,000 of uninventoried bags full of LEGO Star Wars minifigures.
According to CoffeeZilla, there was only $20,000 of Legos left.
And here's things that didn't make it in the video. For one, there was about $50,000 worth of inventory that Crystal had never added in because Brian had giant bags full of Lego Star Wars minifigure pieces that were worth roughly 40 to 50 grand. Crystal never got along because there was just tons of freezer bags full. And if you listen...
Oh, wow. Okay, no one's mentioned that at all. This is the first time I've heard.
Well, it's because everyone's gagged. No one can talk.
Oh, okay, wow.
And it's we never mentioned that in the video because it's I guess it's just an unprovable thing.
Now, if you don't know, LEGO Star Wars minifigures are worth quite a bit. And judging from Brian Mansell's collection, they made up a significant portion of it. I mean, LEGO Star Wars minifigures can cost as much as thousands of dollars on the rarer end, and even more mid-tier ones are easily $50 to $100 each, if they're even slightly rare at all. So this is a big deal, and $50,000 of minifigures is a lot. And apparently, CoffeeZilla never really got to that. He never really learned that info from anyone. I'm not entirely sure how he missed that, but I'm not going to try to blame him for that, whatever. But he missed this $50,000 minifigure portion of the collection. So
he probably missed it because it wasn't discussed because people had that gag order and it couldn't be mentioned.
So let's just say we add this $40,000 to $50,000, Sheldon says, to the collection's value. Now it is up to roughly $147,000 to $157,000, much closer to the $200,000 range. So how do we get to the $200,000 range, right? This collection isn't worth $200,000 from these minifigures alone, is it? Well, let's move on further, where Sheldon, in this interview, actually says CoffeeZilla made a vital mistake in his investigation.
And he had also mentioned, CoffeeZilla brings up Brian did this backdoor deal. Brian told us about that. Why would we bring that up in the video? Brian had an extra Cloud City set that Crystal got him back. So there was never a backdoor deal. All CoffeeZilla had to do was talk to Brian or talk to me, and he would have known that doesn't even have any relevancy. Those did not subtract from any value of the stuff in the store. Those were duplicate sets he was keeping to give to his children. And once this Bricks and Minifigs thing happened, Brian decided he was going to sell those because his whole collection was lost. Yeah. So those were never part of the value. So subtracting those from the value is categorically incorrect.
Wow, he's actually really saying negative things about the investigation that CoffeeZilla did right there. And it seems that he wishes that CoffeeZilla would have had a conversation with him to get a little bit more of the details.
And basically, what CoffeeZilla did is he used all the different side deals and other things involved with this collection and subtracted them from the value of the main collection. So basically, at one point, I think Crystal apparently returned a Cloud City and some other sets to Brian Mansell. And Bricks and Minifigs has covered that in their blog post. We've already gone over that quite a bit. Okay. But that very well could have been $15,000, $20,000 or even more worth of sets. And CoffeeZilla, of course, subtracted that from the total value of the collection. But that may have been a mistake, according to Sheldon. Sheldon says that those were actually not a part of the original consignment deal or collection. Those were separate sets that Brian Mansell was planning to give to his kids or keep or do whatever with and was not planning to sell. But because of his whole ordeal, he kind of needed to sell because the rest of his collection was gone, and he didn't see any point in keeping them or handing them off because the rest of his collection was basically stolen from under him. And so he wanted to sell these other sets, including another Cloud City, which, if you didn't know, that's worth $10,000 to $15,000 depending on the condition and everything like that. So that is a significant portion of side deal value that Coffee kind of tied to the main collection, the main value, which makes sense. I mean, that's what I would assume, but apparently that wasn't even a part of the main consignment deal. So subtracting this $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 or more from this main collection value was a mistake, and that actually undermined the value of the collection. So let's just say that the amount of money in this side deal with this Cloud City and other stuff that Crystal returned to Brian, let's say it was $20,000, right? We know there was a Cloud City in there, so at the very least it's $10,000, and I've heard there were many more items than the Cloud City. So as a low estimate, let's just go $20,000 was in this side deal that CoffeeZilla mistakenly subtracted from the main collection's value. Add $20,000 to our $140,000, $150,000 valuation from before, and now it's up to $160,000 to $177,000, much closer to $200,000. And this is a very conservative estimate as far as this whole side deal thing goes. We don't know exactly how many sets were in these side deals that were.
We have to say, a lot of this is rough math. We're looking at, there's not hard values for any of the product, and there's not hard numbers for the actual amount of product that was there. So we're looking here and we're talking about these numbers, soft number upon soft number, which makes it very difficult to come up with a very strong final number of value. With that being said, someone that is an expert in this whole Lego world can determine an approximate value of all these things, which essentially is what's going on right now. But I think it's worth noting that nothing here is a hard number.
weren't related to the collection that CoffeeZilla subtracted from the main value of the collection. So it very well could be more. It could add up to 200,000, more than 200,000. I'm not sure. I don't have the numbers on all these sets in front of me. But like I said, just estimating on the low end and knowing that there was a Cloud City involved in that, we can estimate probably at the very least $20,000 involved in that side deal. But here is where it gets insane. Now, I'm warning you, I'm going to get a little bit speculative here. I'm just going to use what I can see from all the facts and what I can kind of assume as my personal opinion. This is definitely not proven or anything like that. Okay. But if we go back to the U-Haul story and how, Ammon and Matt McNeff, the CEO and COO of Bricks and Minifigs, were being interviewed by CoffeeZilla and defending the U-Haul story, trying to cover it up, and then trying to explain it away when evidence proved there was a U-Haul there at the store that night of the takeover. And we did get an employee talking about how there were bags of Lego Star Wars sets and minifigures in this U-Haul brought to the Eugene store, I believe the same night or the next day or whatever it was, somewhat connected to the night of the takeover. Well, this actually makes a lot more sense. So if you think about this, right? If Bricks and Minifigs are indeed the villainous, suspicious people that we think they are based on everything we've seen from the situation and how they conduct interviews, how they treat people, and all of that, when they were doing the store takeover, imagine they found $50,000 unmarked in these bags of unmarked minifigures that were not marked at all and were not on the consignment spreadsheet. That is the important distinction. So there's no evidence outside of what Brian could say or anyone else could say that this portion of minifigures is connected to Brian and that it doesn't belong to Bricks and Minifigures. So what does, Brandon Best do? He takes those unmarked minifigure bags, packs them in the U-Haul with who knows whatever else. But I'm just saying, if you were a, suspicious person, if you were looking to steal some Lego, then an unmarked bag of minifigures worth $40,000 to $50,000 that no one can prove it doesn't belong to Bricks and Minifigs, that would be a pretty good target for some stuff you wanted to take.
Yeah, you're looking at that, and if you are one of these, let's call them sketchy people, that is doing bad business, you would see that and you would say, jackpot. I just got myself a free 40 to 50 grand that's going to go in my back pocket because this is not inventoried anywhere. So yeah, totally agree with that.
Now, like I said, I don't know for sure if he did take those minifigure bags. I don't know where they are now. I don't have evidence to back this up. I'm just saying the facts on the table and everything we know about the character of Bricks and Minifigs, Ammon, Matt, Brandon, Josh, everyone involved with the situation on the side of Bricks and Minifigs, I'm just saying it makes a lot of sense for the $50,000 minifigure portion of the collection to be a target. And this also makes a lot more sense and explains why the $200,000 promotional figure was used for this collection in the beginning, because it very well could have been worth much closer to $200,000 than the $107,000 figure we had. Now, I don't know why Crystal, somewhat agreed with CoffeeZilla talking about the collection being worth $107,000. Maybe it's because he didn't talk about the minifigures and she just assumed that was the value of the sets that were not a part of any side deal or anything like that, and $107,000 was the average for all these sets, not including minifigures.
Now, we have to hope that there's no sketchiness going on that side with Crystal as well, right? Because if she agreed to the $107,000 value, but she knew there were these other bags with $50,000 value worth of product inside, then we could maybe say something sketchy is going on that end as well. Let's just hope that there's not, because then that would just be ultimate levels of sketch.
And if that's the case, that does make enough sense for me for this, for this to be logical and for all the facts to line up. So I don't know why Crystal didn't bring up the $50,000 minifigure bags. I'm not entirely sure, but I do somewhat trust, Sheldon here in this interview when he's talking about this, because he says, the reason it hasn't come out yet is because all these gag orders, the temporary restraining order, and from the beginning of this temporary restraining order taking effect, Ben has alluded to some crazy facts in this case, and he's basically said there's some crazy stuff happening in this case, and he wished he could talk about it. And I'm just saying, a $50,000 unmarked, not on the consignment spreadsheet, just a $50,000 random bag of minifigures that belongs to Brian Mansell, being an easy target for theft, and lining up with the timeline of the U-Haul being there the same night of the takeover. That seems like a pretty crazy development, and that's definitely what, it would match the description of what Ben was maybe alluding to when he said there are some other things going on with this case that are insane and he wishes he could talk about them. I guess we'll see what happens when he is, no longer silenced, and we'll see if this $50,000 minifigure bag is indeed completely true. This is just one source, mind you, that is saying this $50,000 minifigure bag is a thing and it was unmarked and it was on the spreadsheet and all of that. But, for what it's worth, I do somewhat trust Sheldon in this interview because he is a party that is, he's very familiar with Brian Mansell, Ben, everyone involved with this. He is a party to this. He was there when it all happened, so I feel like he would know the facts pretty dang well.
I mean, essentially, he was involved head on in this entire thing. So we could assume that he's a solid source. But what goes on from here, right? We hear now that Bricks and Minifigs agreed to pay Reckless Ben. So now we're going to dive in and take part 2 of the story and really figure out, just starting to put these puzzle pieces together.
Bricks and Minifigs may have to pay Reckless Ben a hefty sum of money. Today, Reckless Ben posted an update video on his Patreon going over the ongoing legal situation and giving an update on part 3. And I can't show you the actual video itself because it is, of course, on its Patreon. If you want to go watch it, go subscribe to his Patreon. But with that being said, Ben in this video gives us a lot of good information. He goes over how his legal team and Bricks and Minifigs have been negotiating during this case. And I am under the impression that this started with the modifications of the temporary restraining order, and during that time there were other negotiations going on between Reckless Ben's legal team and Bricks and Minifigs' legal team. And at some point during these negotiations, Reckless Ben's team basically pushed for Bricks and Minifigs to pay damages for every day that Ben was under the temporary restraining order.
Now, keep in mind right here, this is not just Bricks and Minifigs needing to pay back for all the product. The $200,000 value, soft value that we were just discussing in the previous video of what is owed in Lego product. Now, they're going to have to pay damages for Reckless Ben having that gag order, not being able to run his business. So they're going to be in this for over $200,000. Very curious to see what this number might look like.
And this is something I've actually been bringing up, and I said that I hoped that Bricks and Minifigs would pay Ben damages for what has gone on. And if you're wondering what the reasoning that Ben's lawyers gave for this in the negotiations, it was that Ben suffered harm each day that he was silenced. And the very grounds that Bricks and Minifigs got this temporary restraining order approved on in the first place were that Ben was doing some crazy stuff. There were some false claims involved. Specifically, he references the bomb threat allegations and claims that Ben was going to, quote, shoot up Bricks and Minifigs stores, which we all know Ben was never doing that. He's never going to do that. There was never any reason to believe he would. And apparently, Bricks and Minifigs' legal team agrees with that and knew that the grounds this temporary restraining order was granted on were completely false because Bricks and Minifigs' legal team seemingly agreed to the terms to pay Ben for every day this temporary restraining order continues.
Now, it's worth noting, I'm going to give you a little bit of context here for YouTube viewership versus how much it makes. When you're thinking about a video that Reckless Ben may put out, he puts out big videos that get millions of views. For every 1,000 views, we can assume that he'll get between $5 and $10 per 1,000 views, which means if he puts out a video and in that day from that video, he gets 1 million views, that would be $5,000 to $10,000 for that video alone. Now, he's been having this gag order on for a couple of weeks, preventing him from putting out these potential videos that could have gotten that large viewership. So if you just assume $5,000 a day from 1 million views from the lower end of how these videos monetize, and we're looking at, 10 days, that's $50,000. That's not even a full 2 weeks. So I'm very curious to see what the lawyers are going to come up with as far as numbers go right here.
Which I gotta say, this is a really good move by Ben's legal team. Because, at least in my opinion, it seems like Bricks and Minifigs' strategy since the beginning of this case has been, number one, silence Ben.
Yeah.
Number two, keep it going as long as possible. Whether that's through delays, sabotaging some motions and some joint filings and things like that. I mean, Ben has been silenced for how long from this temporary restraining order that has seemingly no merit whatsoever. And even when there were some joint filings from Ben's legal team and Bricks and Minifigs and other defendants in this case, there were clear grammatical and structural errors in these motions that would basically have any judge in the country deny them, because it's just what are you even doing here? And there have been terrible motions, like the way they are written, have just been guaranteed to get rejected and not signed off on by the judge. So at least from my perspective, it seems like Bricks and Minifig's strategy has just been to keep Ben silenced for as long as possible and do anything they can to prevent the part 3 from being uploaded.
Now, that actually is cool by the lawyers from Reckless Ben, because if they start monetizing each day of gag order, and let's just say it's $5,000 per day, every single day that Bricks and Minifigs elongates this gag order, that's going to be more money that they potentially, if the court rules in that favor, have to pay to Reckless Ben, monetizing each day of him not being able to work. That is an interesting way that the lawyers kicked into play to prevent this gag order from ongoing longer and longer, just for the reason of trying to keep him quiet as long as possible.
It makes me wonder what the heck is in part 3. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But something I'm really curious about is what kind of weight this agreement holds moving forward in this case. Bricks and Minifig's legal team agreeing to pay Ben for every day the temporary restraining order continues. And I'm also really curious why they would even agree to that, unless they knew that those false claims were blatantly false, obviously false, that the temporary restraining order was granted on in the first place. Because them agreeing to these terms basically goes against their whole strategy. If they want to keep Ben silent as long as possible, but then they agree to something that would punish them for keeping Ben silenced for a longer time, that's kind of counterintuitive.
It's probably because the amount of money that they're talking about here is too much, and they don't want it to go on longer and longer.
And Ben goes on to say that Judge Tony Graff, who was previously on the case in the Utah District Court, is super difficult. That's what Ben says, super difficult. And we all know this for reasons that, are up for interpretation. I'm sure we all have our own ideas on why Judge Tony Graff has been difficult in this case. But yeah, nobody's really a fan of him, that I've seen on social media. He has made some questionable choices, and to be honest, he's just kept this case going for a long time, and seemingly nothing good has come from it.
I'll give you a little bit of context here, a little bit of vague context. This is all going on in Utah. And in Utah, there is a large community, a large religious community, which we're finding a lot of the people that have to do with this case. I believe it's the judge. I believe it's a lot of the police. I believe it's even the Bricks and Minifigs are all part of this large religious group. And like many different types of groups around, they look out for their own. So maybe things are going on here in favor of those that are part of this group. I'm going to keep it as vague as that. You guys can do your own interpretations. And in the comments, you're welcome to share anything that you want to with anyone that's reading down there.
And then Ben says that episode 3 is finished and ready to post. So it'll go up the moment the temporary restraining order expires. But something I am really wondering about is, now that this case is in federal court, what kind of bearing will the apparent agreeance of these terms to pay Ben for every day the temporary restraining order continues? Is that in writing somewhere? How concrete is that? Because that is huge. Because, Ben deserves to be paid because he has lost revenue from not being able to post part 3 and other content on Bricks and Minifigs. Not to mention, the very reason he was silenced in the beginning was based on completely false claims. And Ben goes on to basically confirm what we've all assumed, that Bricks and Minifigs has been delaying things for a while. Ben says that he planned to release part 3 I think days ago, and at different times, in correlation with the joint filing to modify the temporary restraining order. but they've all been denied all of the modifications for obvious reasons. So Ben has not gotten the chance to post part 3. He's just been delayed day after day, basically being told, okay, tomorrow or the next day you'll be able to post it. And then that time comes, and yes, there's still delays, and he still cannot post it. He is still silenced. So now the case is in limbo, and Ben says he's, of course, confused about what's going on, the constant delays and all of that. And as someone who is not a legal expert by any means, this case has also confused me in many ways, and it's been a learning experience for sure. But now this case is in the hands of Judge Cecilia Romero. I assume she is the federal court judge, and she needs to sign off before the temporary restraining order is lifted. And as soon as she signs off on it, part 3 will release as quick as possible.
And I have to say that part 3 is going to get insane viewership with the amount of attention that's come towards this case over the past couple of weeks. Everyone wants to see that part 3 on Reckless Ben's channel. So what we got here today is, 1, the value of the collection is potentially much larger than anticipated from what CoffeeZilla initially said. So we're looking at around 200,000. Again, those are on soft numbers. And 2, Bricks and Minifigs agreed to pay Reckless Ben daily for the gag order, which is nuts, especially since we don't know what that payment is. Now, if we're talking some small sum of money, a couple of $100s per day, sure, that's easy to agree to for Bricks and Minifigs. But if we're talking about the value of his content and how much he would actually make per day for his videos, we're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of dollars per day, which to me is insane that they would agree to that. Now, if you want to stay up on this story, I have all the details in the full playlist, which you guys can find right here. Make sure you go check them out, guys, and leave your comments down below. I'll see you over there.